So continuing from the first part of the video series, Bernays' first real experiment at manipulating a target audience was to get women to smoke cigarettes.
Since the end of the 19th century, America had become a mass industrial society, with millions clustered together in the cities. Bernays was determined to find a way to manage and alter the way these new crowds thought and felt. To do this, he turned to the writings of his uncle Sigmund. While in Paris, Bernays had sent his uncle a gift of some Havana cigars. In return, Freud had sent him a copy of his general introduction to psychoanalysis. Bernays read it, and the picture of hidden irrational forces inside human beings fascinated him. He wondered whether he might make money by manipulating the unconscious.
What Eddie got from Freud was indeed this idea that there is a lot more going on in human decision-making, not only among individuals, but even more importantly among groups, than this idea that information drives behavior. And so Eddie began to formulate this idea that you had to look at things that would play to people's irrational emotions. And you see, that moved Eddie immediately into a different category from other people in his field and most government officials and managers of the day who thought if you just hit people with all this factual information, they would look at that and say, oh, of course. And Eddie knew that was not the way the world worked.
Bernays set out to experiment with the minds of the popular classes. His most dramatic experiment was to persuade women to smoke. At that time, there was a taboo against women smoking, and one of his early clients, George Hill, the president of the American Tobacco Corporation, asked Bernays to find a way of breaking it.
He said, we're losing half of our market because men have invoked a taboo against women smoking in public. Can you do anything about that? I said, let me think about it. And then I said, have I your permission to see a psychoanalyst to find out what cigarettes mean to women? He said, what'll it cost? So I called up Dr. Brill, A.A. Brill, who was a leading psychoanalyst in New York at that time.
How come you didn't call your uncle? Why didn't you call your uncle?
Because he was in Vienna.
A.A. Brill was one of the first psychoanalysts in America. And for a large fee, he told Bernays that cigarettes were a symbol of the penis and of male sexual power. He told Bernays that if he could find a way to connect cigarettes with the idea of challenging male power, then women would smoke, because then they would have their own penises.
So we may think that this is perhaps a little hilarious even, or maybe that today we wouldn't be subject to such ideas and influence. But I think that really is fundamentally untrue. We have to understand what was going on at the time, that this was the era of women's suffrage, when women were demanding parity with men by also being able to vote. Bernays' idea of leveraging off this issue of the day to exploit women was both incredibly manipulative and brilliant.
Every year, New York held an Easter Day parade to which thousands came. And Bernays decided to stage an event there. He persuaded a group of rich debutantes to hide cigarettes under their clothes. Then they should join the parade, and at a given signal from him, they were to light up the cigarettes dramatically. Bernays then informed the press that he had heard that a group of suffragettes were preparing to protest by lighting up what they called torches of freedom.
He knew this would be an outcry, and he knew that all of the photographers would be there to capture this moment. And so he was ready with a phrase which was torches of freedom. And so here you have a symbol women, young women, debutantes, smoking a cigarette in public with a phrase that means anybody who believes in this kind of equality pretty much has to support them in the ensuing debate about this, because torches of freedom. I mean, what's on all American coins? It's liberty. She's holding up the torch, you see? And so all of this is there together. There's emotion, there's memory, there's a rational phrase, even though it's using a lot of emotional elements. It's a phrase that works in a rational sense. All of this is together. And so the next day, this was not just in all of the New York papers, it was across the United States and around the world. And from that point forward, the sale of cigarettes to women began to rise. He had made them socially acceptable with a single symbolic act.
What Bernays had created was the idea that if a woman smoked, it made her more powerful and independent, an idea that still persists today.
Embrace me, my sweet embrace.
It made him realize that it was possible to persuade people to behave irrationally if you link products to their emotional desires and feelings. The idea that smoking actually made women freer was completely irrational, but it made them feel more independent. It meant that irrelevant objects could become powerful emotional symbols of how you wanted to be seen by others.
The use of the idea that smoking made women more powerful and independent and equal to men has continued over the next decades until the associated risks, of course, of smoking became more widely known. However, you can really see, and this is probably the very first real example of really trying to touch on emotional issues and to spin truth. His use of the term torches of freedom, of course, evoked the image, at least in America, if not in other parts of the world, of the Statue of Liberty standing in the harbor at New York with her torchlight of freedom in her hand, beckoning at everyone. And of course, a torch of freedom. Who doesn't want freedom? What's wrong with freedom? Enslavement is bad. It's, so this idea of associating cigarettes with a torch of freedom was so catchy, and it was such a powerful idea that, as was stated, most of the leading newspapers around the world carried pictures or images of these women marching down the street with cigarettes, and the caption, that women were marching with torches of freedom. This became a really powerful image, and so it convinced women of the day that if they wanted freedom, which is what they did, and that they could express their rebellion of being subjugated politically, and they could express their desire to be equal to men by simply smoking cigarettes. This was an incredibly powerful idea that had a very deep and profound effect on society. In the next part of the videos, we'll talk now about the how Bernays had really discovered this powerful connection between emotions and products.